a few seconds so that I do get this right.
Okay.
So in terms of getting through, I'm just repeat myself a little bit just for the video. In terms of module 2, governance and ethics in health, to start, you just press on the start button. You'll go to the next slide that gives you an overview. And this particular module is going to be about governance and ethics in health. An overview, I'm going to go through that. Look at professional ethics as a sort of theory and principles. And then we'll go into good governance, how that works as principles go, and then structures and functions in governance and some high-level health laws. For you to proceed, press next, and that is the way to navigate the system. Also, you can use menu at the top and do that. So that's just giving you a sense of how to get to this. In terms of overview of governance and ethics, governance is basically about these three concepts: who has power, which is authority; how do they make these decisions and involve other people, which is decision-making process; and then how they held to account, which is accountability. The important thing in health is, especially in governance in health, is for governments in Africa, especially, to not forget that the public service is not the only place they have role to govern. Their governance is of whole society. And so they need to act as stewards and guide the entire society, including the NGO space, the private sector space, and the public service space. And I think that is some of the challenges in African thinking, where there's blinkers on, and the only tool they see available is for them to directly control the public service. And there are some very innovative thinking approaches if you have that step back stewardship approach and actually realize that you can use other people in society to provide public services if you have that kind of stewardship role and see yourself guiding and governing the whole of society approach in terms of the resources available. So that's an important concept in health that's growing, and it's it's not a new thing. It's being used a lot across the rest of the world. I think that we have a colonial habit of treating governments as a control system and being very vested in public services rather than seeing a much more robust sort of lateral thinking in the way in which we might make things happen for the public good. Ethics is basically about rules of conduct, and it's it can be moral. How do we think about right and wrong? And then the law is basically a more clearer concept, which is legal. In other words, has something been written to be saying that that is the law, and usually it's guided by what society feels is the right thing that should be done and governed. But ethics and morality, you know that there are lots of things that are right and should be done in the right way, and there are differences of opinion how that might be done, and that's what we're going to talk a little bit about. How do you actually navigate that? But in any way, in any situation, law takes precedence, and then you have gaps in the law or lack of clarity the law doesn't deal with. And that's where you need to be able to have some sort of way of deciding what is the right thing to do. And as managers go, they have to have that critical thinking, because choices happen all the time. And you have to be able to think, am I being ethical and moral in the way in which I do it? Of course, there are many tools that can help this. And this is, again, something that you look for after law. You look at, well, is there a code of conduct, or is there a charter? Is there a set of rules that's developed at a higher level? Association types, professional association kind of rules that might be there, or professional governance bodies that might be having certain rules that set out what's required, or within an organization where we have, for example, internal controls that say these are the policies of a particular organization. And so you have these where not only legal, but you have other tools that might be available, and then even those might not be clear enough, and then you need to sit and say, well, how do I navigate this? Or the way in which those tools are interpreted may not be correct. So you need to be able to think about the different tools that are available, and I'm sure that some of you come across it, even, for example, performance management systems and risk management systems, etc. So these are often at organizational level. So in terms of still the overview, corporate governance, of course, there are lots of different definitions, and I don't think it's too important to get stuck into that. detail, but I think it's about trying to balance the various interests that exist. And those interests are not just between a board and the executive managers, but all the stakeholders around it, which might be the shareholders, or it might be the customers or the clients. And this is, the kind of thing that one needs to have. How do you structure governance to have all of those interests addressed? But many a time, the sort of corporate governance is focused on a board which represents shareholders that might be there, and in fact looks at questions of what are the expectations, and where's the power, and how do we hold them to account. So these are the different things you need to think about as what do we have in terms of a board, which defines the expectations, and then the executive manager generally tends to execute those expectations, and they need to be measured against the results, which can be the different outcomes that are there based on the different stakeholders. You even have the concept of the environment as being a stakeholder that's growing in boards, where they tend to talk about planetary impact, or workforce can even be a part of the sort of stakeholder grouping, where boards might say, we want to be able to speak to how we're addressing the workforce within our company, or societal or community benefits as well, beyond the client or the customer. So I think there are a number of these ideas, which is about trying to hold people to account, looking at authority, how we actually execute that authority, and how we actually hold that authority to account. So governance is that idea in corporates. Now, getting to the second unit is about, well, what is ethics and morals? When we are sort of don't have that clarity of governance clearly there, or that we're trying to build into our organization some sort of governance tools, a code of conduct, or a performance management system, or policies. These ethical principles are things that as healthcare practitioners, we are not unfamiliar with. We are taught this in our undergraduate work, that as healthcare professionals, we need to be aware of these principles. Now, in the course itself, it talks about beneficence as first, when in fact, non-maleficence is the first principle. It should be the predominant principle. That the first principle is do no harm. It takes precedence over doing good, and especially in terms of the principles goes. So the idea of non-maleficence, do no harm, or sometimes the least harm. And it comes before beneficence, beneficence being do good, which is, the right thing to do. But you start by saying do no harm, do no wrong first, before you try to say let's do good. The second and third and fourth elements are speaking to autonomy, which is a growing idea of how do people rule themselves. In other words, we should be thinking about this principle that we can't decide for other people. And sometimes we make these decisions, which are, very paternalistic. We decide what's good for others, and they may not agree with us. And we need to be aware of that kind of decision-making in the process. And we'll come to some of the theories that help you to think those through. But it can be, where in this idea of autonomy is all about rights. How do we keep people's rights at the front of mind? Then distributive justice is actually not just justice, it's mostly about distributive justice, which is about fairness. How do you keep fairness, especially in terms of resources and how that goes? And many a time in organizations, especially public service, they have to make decisions about, well, do I, not give certain people certain things, or make policies that will not give things, to make sure that we have resources to give everybody, something that is more important. And so you have to make some of these tough calls, and there can be challenges in making those tough calls. Now, the principles are one thing, and they're there, and they're in our sort of space of medical work, but they're also theories. And in fact, this module sort of focuses on that in terms of an accountability of it, as understanding these theories, especially at the quiz. So it's useful to pay attention to ethical theories. And I think they've organized it into 3 sets, which are useful. And they start with basically 3 ideas. One is, does it produce results? Are we judging something based on the results? And that's consequences. Is the result a correct one? Then the others are based, theories are based on not on the consequence. It's not at all the results. It's not, doesn't matter what the results are. It's about other ideas that we need to keep in mind, which people use in our, average thinking about right and wrong. And those are theories that are non-consequentialist. They're not based on the outcome. They're based on a premise that we feel, no, that's the right thing to go about judging something or someone. And then the last one is about agent-centered. In other words, it's about the person's character. It's about who did it. If that person is known to be a good person, doing the right things, then whatever they do would be, you tend to err on the side of their judgment because you look at their character more holistically. So those are the things. It's about the results. It's about ideas beyond results, or it's about the person who is making, the actors, the agents. Whether two people, when they're arguing and we're looking at judging the right and the wrong, we might say that person's a pastor, we know him to be very reputable. This person's a criminal, we don't trust his word. And so we use their character as a judgment to see whether, a matter is right or wrong. All of them have strengths and weaknesses. So in terms of, a continuation of that, in corporates, ethical management is often about, walking the talk. And I think these concepts that are mentioned about respecting, mutual respect between the employer and the employee, the procedural fairness, and the way in which a decision-making is done, in the transparency particularly of it. So it's not the procedures right and that it's transparent. There is also this idea in management ethics of being able to sit and make decisions based on a moral ground or an immoral ground, where an immoral ground is wrong. In other words, it can be done where one does something wrong and it's seen clearly to be wrong and one says it's wrong, but that's what we're doing. Or it can be amoral, where we say, I don't really want to talk right and wrong, but in fact we can say that intentionally, that I'm not going to consider moral issues, I'm going to just do what's needed. Or non-intentionally, we might do something where we say that. And that usually is a problem because amoral thinking sometimes lands up having a moral impact. So it's not a simple thing. One has to think about it. Am I being moral? But if I'm amoral, there is also some sort of impact as well. So you need to think about that. Now, this approaches to management ethics about utilitarian approach, which is really about what's the best outcome. It's part of the mix of theories. So let me just perhaps go, before I jump to that, is to talk about these. Utilitarianism is really what's the best outcome. In other words, use value. What is the result? In other words, what's the people talk about the means, the means and the outcome, the means and the result. So I think the key here is the result good? If it's good for everybody, then it's good. And the good for everybody is not so much everybody, but is the best outcome seen by the actors involved. Egoistic is really about, well, the best outcome for me or for the persons that feel, and they can say that the result's best for me, so it's good. And you can judge that that's actually very egoistic theory of thinking. And that can work. For example, in certain settings, those can be judged to be the best way to do something. If, for example, we are going to have people that are in a panic situation, our body thinks like that. Serve yourself first before you try to fix somebody else. For example, in a plane, there's an egoist theory to say, do not worry about putting the mask on the child, put it on yourself. Because if you put it on the child, you may struggle and then you'll get out of, not get the mask on you and die, and the child will die. So there is some value in that kind of thinking as well. Common good is basically, general will. In other words, everybody benefits from the result outcome. Some things that are not results-based, non-consequentialist, can be a person. Usually it's about the person and their outlook, not their character, but about the way in which they functioned. And that can be about they did their duty. In other words, I did my duty and I did the right thing. I might be a criminal, but I did the right thing because that was my duty, my job, that was expected of me. So I did it. And of course, the result was not good, but I did my duty. And that can be a way to make a judgment about it. People can also say, I didn't, do my duty because that person's had a right And so I had to respect that right, and I could not do my duty. And the result may have been bad, but that was because I had to respect that right and right-based thinking. Fairness is basically a concept that comes from, not the result, but based on if we were free and equal in an ideal society, that would be the right thing to have done. And that would be the fair thing to do. It's not very strongly context-based because it's based on an artificial situation. It might be initial, or it might be a first world country setting, but we're taking an ideal situation and we might say, well, that's the right thing to do, but it's not quite the right thing to do in our context. So you can say, you can argue cases like that. Divine command, God tells me that that's the right thing to do, and so that is what I did. I could not give that person, abortion because I'm a Christian and I don't believe in that. And so I referred the person to someone else, even though on the way they died. But I did what I did, and I did my duty, but my right was I can actually have this, depending on the law, that I do have that ability to act on my own moral judgment, which might be the theory of, non-consequentialist divine command. Agent-centered, as I said, is basically a character. So that's basically where we are. And you can see that in management, you can have very similar approaches. They speak to those theories as well. There are obviously barriers to this. We have a chain of command. People sometimes act in a group, having a particular mentality, like staff feel patients are all really demanding. And that can be a sort of cult, kind of group think. People can also, in management, not be very clear about what they really is the right and the wrong. And usually that's the problem. They don't have clear policies. Management behave badly. They haven't set out clearly penalties, and they don't do education. So those are tending to be the ways in which you can manage these challenges of barriers to management ethics. And of course, you have to think about, when you do ethical reasoning, that is it the fact that you are thinking based on right or wrong, or your own biases which come along, that you are influenced by your own thinking about people, which can be, those are bad people, and I don't like, a particular group, because, and you don't realize that your judgment is slighted by that kind of thing. So these are just, processes around it. And usually the rule of thumb, is also a decision-making process where we usually say, let's look at what is there, let's then do something, and then we realize it's not the right thing to do, and we adjust. And I think these are just different people, different ways of making decisions and using those same frameworks we just talked about in theories. Corporate ethics, there's this kind of thing you can see setting out a code of ethics, training people, communicating it, and having a reporting system, audit systems, and investigating it. And if governments or companies or any organization doesn't do it, they might lose, income, but they also lose reputation. And in governments, that's, losing an election. So governance is something that people need to adhere to and find ways to do it. Well, in terms of good governance, and particularly in corporates, the idea is to pick up on those key issues, and they expanded, not only who is, having the power, but particularly the responsiveness to the stakeholders, and the way in which they exercise that power. So it's the accountability, the transparency, it's about responsiveness, it's about equity and inclusiveness, being effective and efficient, following the rule of law, being participatory in the way in which you do that, which includes being transparent, but also involving people, and then trying to find ways in which there's consensus. So all these concepts are quite important, and I think they're pretty self-explanatory, and one just has to find ways in which, when you're examining good governance, that you examine those ideas. And you can find weak governance in terms of people not having their voice, in terms of political stability, where governments and their organizations are not very stable, the society is not stable, government's not effective, rule of law is not there, the regulatory quality is not there, they don't create systems to do it, and invariably corruption creeps up in that kind of thing. And these are some of the problems that we see across Africa. Well, corruption and bribery, you need to be able to prevent that. And I think that's just people learning to step back and think about it. I think I wouldn't really bother too much about the detail. And I think that we really need to look at virtue ethics, which is really about the key question in terms of corruption. Can we be holding ourselves to higher ideals and looking at how we achieve justice in this society? And justice, is described as distributive, but it can also be, compensatory where somebody has been harmed. Retributive is similar. And I think that in terms of doing that, we need to look at ways in which we see how to improve it. So there's a lot of repetition in this module, and I think you should be able to step back and see them as big picture views. Of course, government and governance, I mean, this is not just in government, but in any organization, you need to set up structures. And of course, across the board, from international down to facility, there are a whole host of different structures, which are often the sort of things that land up in law, sort of guiding the way in which you organize. But there are also governance structures, which are agencies, the WHO, or other non-government structures that impact on government. Again, governance problems, similarly, they're weak, often they're poor linkages and the boundaries are not managed well. So you can easily put a lot of this material within this module into simpler concepts. I think I try to follow the text of it, but it can be made simpler by just simply gathering this information in a sort of tighter arrangement. So effective governance is about managing results being delivered, having accountability and transparencies. And often the real problem is people and customs. And I think this is a challenge we have, and we make it effective by clinical and risk audits and risk management processes. And I think we've got different functions across government to try and help that happen. Just in the last statement or the last unit, you have health laws, government agreements, and these are all just the big things. Health laws, you've got international human rights. You need to be aware of that, draw that down into any policy at a local level. You've got declarations like the Abuja Declaration, UHC declarations, etc. You need to draw that down, apply it in terms of how you function at an organizational government level. You also have to think about public health laws. These are international ones. There's TRIPS and tobacco control, a bundle of laws that have legal impact that we need to be aware of and use relevantly. TRIPS is basically about intellectual property. And then we've got these declarations, which are, where governments have committed themselves as well. You might consider them also these international declarations and commitments. And those include the Millennium Development Goals, Sustainable Development Goals. And interestingly, Sustainable Development Goals until 2030, 6 of the 17 SDGs are relevant to health, and we need to be aware of them. So have a look at them, understand them better, so that you're familiar with these and can look to them. And these are some of the elements that we get so focused on delivery of healthcare that we forget we have an obligation to deal with some of these others, whether it is education or health, water or environment, etc. So think about that. And then, of course, there's this expired and fake drugs, which the unit sort of brings on, which I thought not very important. So there we have it. That's the sort of overview very quickly of the different types of the different elements or the units within the module. I've gone through 30 minutes and I'm glad that it's short. I'm hoping we will break up into groups, and but first, before we do that, let me just see if we've got some questions, and then from that we will then look at breaking up into groups, and that's it. Thanks. I think most of them are thanks and introductions. I think there's a question: the government framework may be applicable, but what about private? There's no difference. I think this question from Tamiru is asking me, is it different with privately owned health facilities and companies? Not. In fact, it's very important for any private sector organization to do that. And in fact, many of these concepts are captured in many principles. I know there's a King's report that actually spells out many of these same elements for private corporates that you might see. If you look at Google King's corporate governance, you might see some of that. And internationally, you'll find very similar elements. I think the problem is that and I think that in the private sector, they tend to have much wider thinking growing about stakeholders that often is captured more by governments thinking about stakeholders. But many a time governance structures are very antiquated, where private sector have gotten on much more robustly in terms of taking forward. So yes, Eben, Peter, Paul, the session's been recorded. It'll be available on the webpage. You'll go to AfroPHC and you should see that. Let's just see if there are any more questions in the chat. Doesn't seem like it. So happy to see all of you. And I think those of you who've joined, you'll see that the recording will be available. We want to make sure that the meetings are interactive, because we want to embed the learning into your sort of everyday practice. So that's why the discussion is going to be much more valuable to you. So let me stop there. We're going to break for an hour and come back maybe in 50 minutes and get some feedback. The questions, on what you thought, what was your group perspective? We've got about almost 100 people in the meeting, so we're going to break up into groups of not more than 10 people, so that there is some variety. But considering that, we'll make it 8 because some people may leave, and we'll organize them into that. So you, in fact, now have the opportunity to join rooms. It's very random, so please join it if you can. If you have any difficulties, I'm not sure that anybody feels they would like to be conversing in French. If they do, please rename yourself. If you go to your participant list, and if you go to hover over your name, you can actually click on more. If you hover over it, you'll see more pop up. And under the more, you can rename yourself and just put yourself in F, an F after your name. And then I will see if I can rearrange that into a group of friend speakers. But otherwise, I think I should have done that right at the beginning so that you could do that effectively. If not, just hang back in the meeting and unmute yourself and tell me if you'd like to be doing it in French, in a French group, and then we'll try and organize that. So I think, Dr. Sitieni, I think the private sector process and structures, yeah, you're right, that it can be much simpler, but I think that big corporates, it is quite complex as well. Not much different than the public service goes. So let me stop there. I think, thank you for all the comments. I think Carol has asked, what are some of the actions you can be done when private sector knowingly acts unethically? I think that that's exactly what the public service needs to be able to put into law. And that's the idea, is that the public service needs to see the broader public, the broader society functioning and govern the way in which private sector functions. And that does not mean interfering in the process, but guiding the sort of correct thinking. It might be in the way in which they interact with the public service, and that can be managed within public service interaction laws, or it can be managed, for example, in terms of government setting up corporate ethics standards and help making sure that adherence to those standards, and those don't need to be government created. Government can look and push and help private sector to actually create that with civil society to create such structures. And so there's much in the way of opportunity for the private sector to be guided, but it requires a public service of the government that thinks more broadly than seeing itself as limited to just acting in the private sector. And then at the same time, not to be interfering with the private sector's functioning ability to do things, but guide it in a way that's exactly, participatory and transparent and involving people in the process. And I think these can be very helpful. And in fact, in doing that, increasingly, we are moving towards a situation where they create an environment in which the public service can be broken down in a way where there's decentralized authority, and even public service units of care can become part of that milieu of acting within the parameters of laws set up and systems set up in the broad society. And so government funds can be directed to public service that is much more empowered, and potentially private sector that's much more empowered to then act within a much more regulated environment. And if you look at the document that we produced on the policy for building PHC teams in Africa, we push that idea strongly, that we need an African government that thinks more respectfully of the private sector and health professionals and allows them to act, whether public owned or private owned, to act with discretion, and that they use their training better, and that they're not micromanaged by managers who don't understand things. And there are ways to embark upon this process. So I must not go on too much. We want to create these rooms. So I'm going to create the rooms now, and you please join it. As I say, if your friend's speaking and want to opt out, don't join it, and then I'll create another room. So please feel free to join the room. And when you join it, I would trust that you'll form agree to a facilitator and a rapporteur. To take some notes. Sorry. If you're still in this room, that is a problem. So I'm going to just ask you, please unmute and tell me what the problem is. I'm going to try and put in the chat quickly so that everyone gets this. Oh, geez. Give me a few seconds. I think people will have to. Okay, I'm going to come to you at the rooms shortly. Okay, so all of you should be getting your, all right, unassigned. I'm going to assign you to groups. So I'll just spread you around. Those who feel that they are needing to be speaking French, please feel free to pick up your hand. I'll be with you shortly. Okay. If you're still in this group, I've got Brenda, welcome. Brenda, let me just make you co-host so you could assist a little bit with some of the participation problems. And you're here, then I've got Jennifer Anise, Christopher, Dr. Mwanda, Dr. Gabeloe, Emmanuel, Godfrey, Infinix, Irene. You should be seeing something popping up on your screen. Please join that. If you're battling, I think you'll have to join and come back again, but let me just see if I can help some people in other rooms. So let me just quickly join people.
Hello, everyone. For those who have not joined the breakout session, please let us know if you're having any challenges. Let us know if you're having any challenges joining any of the breakout sessions. All right, Joseph, I'm assigning you to room 8. Please join the pop-up. Click on the join in on your pop-up screen. Ambrose, I'm joining you to group 3, room 3. Dr. Christine Omwanda, are you having any challenges? Dr. Christine? If you're having any challenges, please let us know. You're supposed to join room 2. I see others are joining. Okay, let me just share. There'll be a pop-up message to allow you to join one of the groups. Please click on it and join so that you may continue the discussions. Now, for those who are joining, we are on the second session of this session. We are into breakout rooms. Please let us know if you're unable to join any of the groups. You're having 8 groups, sorry. So if you're having challenges joining either of the group, please let us know. So that we can assign you to a group session. We are still having a number who are yet to join. So I don't know if you're having any challenges. Christopher, Godfrey, Lillian, Luhaka, Dr. Christine. Let us know if you're having challenges joining the breakout sessions. Dr. Christine and Godfrey, you're supposed to be in breakout session room 2. Mr. Lindani, we have breakout to breakout session. So let me just assign you to one of the groups. So please join and continue the conversations. Click on the pop-up message on your screen to join the breakout room. Great. Uzoamaka, please click on the pop-up message on your screen to join the breakout session. Same to Joseph. Oh, great. Lillian, are you having any challenges joining the breakout session? Elaine and Paul, welcome to this session. Members are into breakout sessions, so I'm going to put you into a breakout room. Please click on the pop-up message on your screen to join a group and continue the conversation. So just on your screen, click on the pop-up message to join a group so that you're able to continue the conversation and catch up with your colleagues. Prof, you're on mute, but I can see.
Yeah, sorry, I'm just checking why the people who are still around, Godfrey, Christopher, Elaine, I think they're still struggling, or they just decided to wait. Not sure. Okay.
Maybe if they can unmute and let us know.
Yeah, feel free to unmute. Tell us if you're having a challenge. If you're just taking a break, let us know as well, that we don't pester you. I think I just need to make sure.
Susan, please click on the pop-up message on your screen to join a breakout session room. And there's a pop-up message on your screen to join a breakout session. Please click on it to join.
Lillian, Matthew, do you want us to allocate to a group?
Matthew just joined in. Lillian, I don't know if she's having a problem because she's been dropping from the call and coming back. I don't know if she's internet.
Maybe. Well, let's just give her another one. But if she can not do that, she can come back to us. All right, Matthew, enjoy. I think we'll give it another Brenda,
click
was
on
it
the
about
pop-up message to join. Oh,
we've done
good,
about
great.
15 minutes or 20 minutes, been about 25, 30 minutes, eh? Okay. I think we
13 minutes.
30 minutes so far, yeah? Okay.
Yes.
Well, people have still been struggling to try and get their groups sort of dynamic getting going, so we'll try and give them till the end of this. So we've got 12 by 8, so we've got a bit of 100 people. I think people are also dropping off on the groups as well. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I think we will give them group 8. Okay. Let me go there.
Prof, you're on mute.
Brenda, is it not seeming like it's sitting at 100 and not going above? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that's 60, 72. Yeah, it's sitting at 100 and not going above. I suspect we are having the problems too. I must talk to them.
I joining the rooms or
Yeah, if you look at the number, I think we are having it's topping at 100. It's not going beyond 100. And I think that's a problem with my settings or the people at Zoom that they're sitting. I've actually added, because of our last meeting, I added, a subscription to allow 500 people, but clearly there's something still happening. So I'm going to have to deal with this afterwards, because I had paid the extra money.
So we are still having a limit of 100.
Yeah, I think it's stopping at 100. It's somehow limiting it at 100. So that's a problem which we had last time. They couldn't attend, more than 100 couldn't attend. And I actually went on and added, the subscription to allow 500. But I'm seeing here still there's like the total group is not going beyond 100. It's kind of bouncing around there. And I suspect that's because of some challenge. So I'm going to have to deal with it.
Yeah, I think there's a setting you need to. Maybe after this, you should write to them.
Yes, exactly. I mean, I thought it was sorted, but this is the first meeting that we've had it kind of going up at that number. All right. Well, good. I think people one group only got to kind of get their act together now. So we'll have to give people at least till past. And then we'll see if we can get some sort of sharing of, ideas from the 8 groups. It's yeah, they're still actually large, okay. So we'll see how they reflect on it.
All right.
Okay. Jennifer, how does this process? Am I taping still?
Yes, Prof.
We've been taping the meanwhile, so I should stop that live stream.